Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Hey, welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I am Jim. I'm joined today with Will and EJ. EJ, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Jim. Good to meet you, Will.
Hey, EJ.
Yeah. Will, it's been like about a week since you've been on a podcast, but with us. So thank you for joining us again.
I'm happy to be here, Jim. I just there's so many podcasts. The Draft Professor has content every night of the week, multiple shows, and there's so many shows it actually confused me, your guest tonight. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm working on overcoming because that's what we do. It's draft season, and sometimes you just got to roll with it.
Yeah. So this is a fun exercise. We're gonna do 32 skill players for 32 teams, implying that EJ has a list of 32 defensive players that he thinks are good fits for the team. And Will has his own list of 32 players, 32 defensive players for each team. And, you know, I don't necessarily know a better way to introduce it other than to say, like, I thought it would be a really fun activity. We're going to do a very similar episode for offensive players in the future. But why don't we go ahead and get started? So let me share my screen. And the first overall pick in the draft is the Titans. So that doesn't mean that they're going to select a defensive player. But EJ, what defensive player do you have as the best scheme fit for the Titans?
So I picked for the Titans, I picked cornerback, and I went with Darian Porter, a cornerback out of Iowa State. So
anything specifically that stands out as to why you would think that he's a good fit for the Titans?
So looking at the Titans, pretty much how my criteria, how I went through it. I was looking at, upcoming free agents. I looking at what they got on their roster and pretty much just a quick browse of what type of defense that they run. And pretty much, I mean, with cornerbacks, you got to be able to play every coverage now. So I basically looked at the Titans roster. They do have L'Jarius Sneed, who they signed last year, and they got Chidobe Awuzie, but that's about it. It's no other player of note that's in that cornerback room that they really can hang their hat on. So I was looking for more of an upgrade over Chidobe Awuzie, and I went with Darian Porter. He is that he's in that L'Jarius Sneed mode, tall, long, fast. This is a guy that I think he's going to has a very good combine. He's one of those athletes that's going to stand out. His issue is that he's on the raw side, only been playing cornerback essentially for 1 year. He played wide receiver before that. But I think he's going to give you immediate impact year one, if at the very least on special teams, because he was one of those core special teams guys at Iowa State. But yeah, I think he's going to add to their cornerback room, and he's going to give them some length and some athleticism to go along with L'Jarius Sneed, and to go along with that with a young defense that's actually getting pretty good.
And Will, who did you have as a good defensive scheme fit for the Titans?
Well, I approach this exercise a little bit differently, which is, I think this is probably useful to explain at the beginning. I approach this as if there were no offensive players available in the draft, and looked at who were the best players on the board that were a scheme fit for the teams in question, right? So it could be that they, don't choose to, take this player in the first round, but chances are they would be able to make a first round pick of this player if they wanted to. But it also illustrates maybe the kind of player that would fit if there's somebody else in the draft later. So since we didn't really have any rules about what we were doing, I hope you don't mind too much. That's the way I approached it.
No rules. It's going to be better content without rules.
That's how we play. No rules.
Okay, so I think I look at the Titans. They're a team that could use just about everything. So it doesn't matter too much about which player you choose. But I think that edge rusher for them in particular, I think that, just reading and following some of the people in the Titans land that follow the team, edge rusher is really a big thing for them. And I would say that, either the best player of the draft or the best defensive player of the draft, depending on how you want to look at it for my board, would be Abdul Carter from Penn State. And I think a guy like that works. He transcends scheme, right? He lined up as an off-ball linebacker for 2 years and was a dominant player, switched to being an edge rusher and dominated there as well. I think you could move him all around your defense and use him in different ways. You could have 2 other edge rushers on the field with him and do practical things. So I feel like Abdul Carter, although he fits anywhere, they have a need there, and it definitely fits.
Okay. And then the team with the number 2 overall pick in the draft is Cleveland Browns. So, Will, what defensive player did you pick for Cleveland?
For Cleveland, there's a lot of talk about them needing edge rusher because of their situation with the not knowing about Myles Garrett, wanting to trade. And I'm not sure that's really going to happen. I feel like it's a lot of posturing that will probably, and it's a little bit like the situations in San Francisco, where there's a lot of posturing that will ultimately result in them making Myles Garrett happy and continuing on, especially if they're going to, get a shot at a good quarterback this year and maybe make some upgrades in that area. So at any rate, I chose corner for them. I chose Travis Hunter. I think Travis Hunter, just strictly as a defensive player, could make a difference on any team. That gives them a pair of shutdown corners and sets them up for that at the position where they don't have to feel pressured to re-sign players that they, or if they're going to have to overpay or something. So I like the idea of Travis Hunter in Cleveland.
Okay, and EJ, what did you think is a good defensive scheme fit for Cleveland?
I did go with edge, because even if Myles Garrett is still there, they can still use another rusher off the edge. There are other edges. Isaiah McGuire. He was a solid player, but you can never not need pass rush. And the thing with what the Browns run, their defensive coordinator is Jim Schwartz. What he likes to, pressure on the defensive line is everything to him. His motto is play to run on the way to the quarterback. He likes to play in a base 4-2 front and he likes to use a wide 9 front where both his defensive ends are lined up out wide and both his defensive tackles are at a 3 technique. It allows more space for your more faster, more athletic rushers to get upfield and get penetration. So I gave them Cal Kennard out of South Carolina. Now with these picks, these are not I didn't go by first. Not all these guys I got as first rounders.
No.
Not all these guys and not all these teams are actually going to have a shot at getting some of these players. But I just did this as a mold of the type of player that could help in that scheme. So I gave it to Kyle Kennard, and I think he probably would fit right in on that Cleveland defense as a designated pass rusher, or if they wanted to start him, they could do that.
No, and I like how each of you interpreted the activity differently, and I think it's going to make this humorous even though you did it differently, if you converge on the same players at some point in the list.
Yep.
So next team in the draft order, I believe, is the New York Football Giants. So EJ, who is your pick for the Giants?
So for the Giants, I went with edge rusher. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I went with defensive tackle for the Giants. I gave them Mason Graham. So, and the reason why is because looking at their defensive depth chart, I mean, the Giants defense is another defense that can use a little bit of everything, but they use pretty much, they play a lot of odd fronts in their base. Everybody goes to nickel with 4 down linemen in passing situations, but on neutral downs, they're in the odd front with their base with Dexter Lawrence as their nose tackle. And I thought if you had Dexter Lawrence and you put Mason Graham next to him, and then you put 2 outside linebacker / edge rushers on the outside of that, that's a scary defensive front that you could use. And I mean, of course, the Giants, they're probably going to look at quarterback. They're going to look offense first, but if they were to look Mason Graham, he would be an excellent scheme fit for them.
And Will, who is your best defensive scheme fit for the New York Giants?
I think Will Johnson is a player that I happen to think that Will Johnson is, the injury is a question mark that I can't answer. Not only am I not at the combine, I'm not a team doing medicals for the Giants, but I could conceive of Will Johnson, if there's any question at all about the medical, him falling to like a second round pick even. But I would, in this concept, this conceit that I have as far as an all defensive draft, he would be, one of the top 3 players on the board. And I think a player that fits with the Giants the Giants, much like Tennessee, I think could take the help almost anywhere right now. There's not that much talent on the roster. But Johnson is I think a scheme diverse player. He is probably as active. He's like, if you like a physical corner, he can work for that. If you like somebody to just play trail technique and cover 3, there's film of him doing that. And he can just be like a one-on, he can take away somebody coverage and man-to-man. So I kind of feel like that's a good choice for a team that needs everything. A team that's pretty established later on, like we get further down the draft, they have a more specific need, I think, and it starts to get into more scheme and so on. But that was my reason.
I think we're going to see that trend as we get through. So I kind of agree with that. So Will, who is your best scheme fit for the New England Patriots?
I chose Mason Graham. I think, I know Jim, you were, I don't know if you were joking. You were joking about there being 21 teams that wouldn't be a scheme fit for Grant. I don't know. Like, I feel like we have a little prospect fatigue sometimes on some of these guys that are just, their tape is kind of awesome. And I also know that you, as a Buffalo Bills fan, really wanted him to fall to the Bills. So I get your motivations, but I feel like, they have kind of solid players on defensive line, but they don't really have like an action player. I feel like you always need to have on your defensive line at least, 1 or 2 really stalwart players who are going to protect you against the run, and they're going to push the pocket and whatever. But then you need to have like a guy that just creates chaos a little bit. And I feel like that's what Graham does. If you're Philadelphia, you have multiple versions of all of those, but for New England, they'll settle for having a little bit of action.
And EJ, who is your best defensive scheme fit for the New England Patriots?
I went on the defensive line as well. I went with Boston College, Donovan Ezaraku. I went for the edge rusher. They're another team that likes to play odd fronts. And Donovan Ezaraku, he's quickly becoming one of my favorite edge rushers in this class. And he gets after it off the edge. And you look at the Patriots roster with Anthony Jennings and Jawan Bentley, there's room to add more juice to that pass rush room. So I went with Donovan Ezaraku as a good fit there.
Okay, and I'm not looking at a draft order, but I believe the Jaguars have the 5th pick. So, EJ, who would be your best defensive scheme fit for the Jacksonville Jaguars?
So for Jacksonville, I went with. Let me pull up my notes, make sure I got it right. So for Jacksonville, I went with a safety strictly because they Andre Cisco's a pending free agent. Who knows if he's going to be back with them or not. They have a pretty solid young defense that I would like to see grow over time, but Cisco is a question mark because he may want to go somewhere else, and then they got a new coaching staff coming in there, so who knows what they want to do with him. So I went with Malachi Starks as a replacement for Andre Cisco.
And Will, who was your best defensive scheme fit for the Jacksonville Jaguars?
They're going to have PTSD when I say this, but because the guy's name is Walker. But Jalen Walker is a fit for them because I think among teams, maybe not excluding Dallas, they might be the team that is most interested in multi-tool linebackers. So they like this idea of having an elephant or some kind of edge player who also plays linebacker, and there isn't a better fit for that in the draft than Jalen Walker. In fact, it kind of wouldn't totally shock me if that was actually their pick. It might be better suited to them if they trade out of this spot into something slightly lower. But I feel like that's a player that fits not only a need that they have, but it fits their style.
Okay. And who is your best scheme fit for the Raiders?
I really like Robert Spillane. He's the guy you want to root for. They just keep trying to replace him every team he's on, and he just keeps making plays. But someone like Jihad Campbell, I joked about the Jacksonville maybe trading down to get Jalen Walker, but right in the spot where they are, the Raiders, let's say they sign a quarterback, let's say they get Matt Stafford somehow and they don't have to give up this pick. Jihad Campbell is a guy that can do everything. He's one of the few linebackers in this or any draft that I think you could trust in any role. He could come in as a player playing in the being pass oriented or blitzing with playing next to Robert Spillane, or then someday he could be the guy that's the guy and pushes Spillane out off the field. So Jihad Campbell's just an outstanding talent and certainly fits. They've generally been built around a guy in the middle of the defense that makes all the plays and just never going to go wrong adding someone like Jihad Campbell.
Okay, and EJ, who is your best defensive scheme fit for the Raiders?
I'm with you on Spillane. Well, I think he's a good player. They if they were smart, they should keep him. but I went with safety. They got two pending two starting free safeties are unrestricted free agents. They're not going to be able to bring back both of them. They probably would like to bring back Trayvon Merrick. He's the better of the two, but he may cost more money than they're willing to pay. And even if they do bring him back, they're losing Marcus Epps. So I gave them Xavier Watts from Notre Dame as a replacement in that safety position. Xavier Watts, he's got the instincts, he's got the ball ability, something that they could use a little bit more of in that Raiders defensive backfield.
Okay, and the 7th pick is the other New York football team, the Jets. So EJ, who is your best defensive scheme fit for the Jets?
So for the Jets, I gave them a little bit more length and a little bit more size and athleticism in the defensive backfield. I don't know if you can go safety or you can call him a slot corner, or I went with Nick Emmanwori. I think he can play. He can wear a lot of hats in that defensive scheme. He can be like your Kyle Hamilton or your Derwin James, where you put him in the slot and he acts as your nickel defender. I mean, this guy's 6'3", 227, so he could be your dime linebacker. He can be your nickel defender, or he can be your on the roof safety. He can play a lot of roles in there. The reason why I went with them because they have a lot of free agents in their backfield, in their defensive backfield, like DJ Reed, Jalen Mills, Chuck Clark. They're all unrestricted free agents, so it would be nice for them to add a little bit more athleticism and a little bit more youth to go with Sauce Gardner in that defensive backfield. So I gave him all around defensive back Nick Emmanwori.
I do like that. A couple of the Jets draft professors. If Xavier Watts falls to the Jets pick in round 2, they're almost always going safety if the right player falls to them in round 2. So I would put Evan Worry in that same list. If he falls to the Jets in round 2, I think that's going to prove to be a good positional value for the Jets. So, Will, what do you have as your best defensive scheme fit for the Jets?
Just careful, because you keep saying scheme fit for them, which is a scheme fit for them. It's a fit for them, but it's more based on sort of the best defender available that fits their needs. So because I'm up against a fellow guest who is nailing it in terms of scheme fits. So I'm gonna feel a little bit, but this player does a little bit of both. Derek Harmon is the player I selected, a defensive lineman from Oregon. I'm still in players here at this pick 7 who are pretty scheme transcendent, which I think those are the players that should be at the top of your board, right? On offense and defense, they should be players that don't require a context for you to imagine them being successful in the NFL. So at any rate, Harmon is a guy that he reminds me a little bit. I'm a Steelers fan. He reminds me a little bit of Cam Hayward in terms of a player that could play all along your defensive front, really. And I think the thing about the Jets, the way that they played this last season, they really tried to give teams different looks. They were into a little bit of that, if you recall, the kind of thing that the Patriots did under Belichick, where they would come out with a slightly different plan each week for teams. And I feel like a defensive lineman that can move around and play in different fronts is really key to that. Harmon could be probably a pretty passable, 1 tech or even a 0, and he's probably suited to be a 5 tech and can give you a little pass rush as a 3 tech. So I like this fit for the Jets.
Okay. And then, Will, who is your best scheme fit for the Carolina Panthers? Carolina
Panthers, again, on defense especially, need everything. But they not only need an edge rusher, they're also like Jacksonville in that they like to have a guy that sometimes has his hand on the ground and sometimes plays off ball or will drop. Michael Williams from Georgia, at this point, in terms of what I have on the board as my top defensive players, is a player I feel like could do that. He's definitely going to require some work. I don't know that he's a player that, like, the instant you put him in on any defense, that he is just going to start from day one and do everything you want him to do. But I feel like he could come in immediately just as a stunt pass rusher, and you could work him in to your defense and build a role for him. But I like the fact that he's got a really wide ranging skill set fits for this team.
Okay. And EJ, who is your best fit for Carolina?
With Carolina, they need all the help they can get. So I just went with the most talented player I can find. So I gave them Travis Hunter. The role he plays there, because when you look at Carolina's roster, what's left on their roster at cornerback is J.C. Horn and literally nothing else. So you got to start somewhere. So I gave them Travis Hunter, and I kept in mind the fact that he probably would want a role on offense as well. So he can play cornerback for them. They play in the eye front. Well, they play a variety of coverages, mainly zone coverages, which Travis Hunter excels at. And there's room in that offense for a role for Travis Hunter to be a slot receiver, or you want him to be an outside speed guy. It's a role for him on that offense as well. Because that's another thing with Travis Hunter, you gotta keep in mind what he wants to do, or if he actually wants to play offense and defense, it has to be a role for him there. And I think with the Panthers, is room for him at the wide receiver position, and it's definitely room for him at the cornerback position.
Okay, and then the next team in the draft order is the Saints. So EJ, who is your best defensive fit for the New Orleans Saints?
So with the Saints, this is where I went with Will Johnson. They lost Marshawn. Well, they traded away Marshawn Lattimore, and so they're going to need a little bit more help at that safety position. Digging into their depth chart, they got a new defensive coordinator coming in, and that's why his name escapes me. It's Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley, what he likes to do, he likes to play his two high safeties, cover 6, cover 4, and he likes his corners to play off man or zone. That's right up Will Johnson's alley. His instincts are excellent. His break on the ball is excellent. He's got the length to make those to cover a lot of ground in his zone coverage. So I went with Will Johnson there as a scheme fit.
Cool. And Will, who is your best fit for the Saints?
I think their situation with pass rusher, they got a hand in the ground guy, sort of plays their strong side. That's been a stalwart in the league for years. But as was said earlier in the podcast, you can never have enough pass rushers. And with pass rushers on my team, I like to mix up the styles that you have because it might be that you face a team where speed kills them. They just can't stop the speed, and other teams you play need power, and sometimes you need a guy that has better technique. So on. So I had a James Pierce. A little bit enigmatic, but I feel like he had some juice to their, to what's happening with the other side of the line for New Orleans. It's like you got power and a little bit of, a guy wrecking with big bodies on the other side, but you need somebody sometimes to have that speed element, and I feel like that would really help their scheme.
Okay. And Will, who is your best fit for the Chicago Bears?
I think Chicago needs some big bodies in the middle of their defense, and there's few bigger in this draft than Deone Walker. I'm higher on Walker than I would say. I'm going to say at this point 75 to 80% of the draft world, maybe more. I am more like I loved his 2023 and his 2024. I think can at least partially be explained by the fact that he was dealing with a back injury and then got an infection that put him in the hospital, and that's why he actually missed time. When you put his season in that context, he's a 20-year-old who faced some adversity physically, probably for the first time in his life. But for a team like Chicago, that they're playing in a division with Detroit. You got to have some big bodies to fight wars. Once again, as an AFC North fan, that I'm used to that idea of like the AFC North football where they started drafting players on the teams in that division that were sort of, set for, hand fighting in the trenches. And so I feel like Deone Walker is a guy that maybe could, he offers a little bit more as a pass rusher at this stage of his career, but that's because he is still a work in progress. And I think once his 20-year-old body meets some professional coaching and gets his pad level lower, we saw examples at the Senior Bowl. When he comes off the ball low, he's going to destroy run plays as well as being a good pass rusher. So I feel like that's a player that can help Chicago. Sorry for the long explanation, but that's my Deone Walker pitch.
Oh, it's all good. So EJ, what did you have for Chicago?
Yeah. Deone Walker makes perfect sense for them. I mean, and him next to Jaron Dexter, that's a big defensive tackle tandem that teams are going to have a hard time to move. I went with the edge rusher. I gave him Mike Green. Looking at their roster, the only player under contract that's has any real experience playing defensive end is Montez Sweat. So I put Mike Green next to Montez Sweat, and Mike Green will come into a situation where he can get single blocking because Montez is going to take all the attention. He doesn't have to be the guy at the pass rushing. You can let him grow into what he's going to be. But I think Chicago definitely needs another edge rusher to go along with Montez Sweat.
Okay, and who is your best scheme fit for the San Francisco 49ers?
San Francisco 49ers, I got so for them, they basically run a 4-man front. So they got their 4 defensive linemen. They like to shoot the gaps. They like to create pressure there. They don't ask their guys to do a lot of read and react. So I went with defensive tackle. They're losing Javon Hargrave to free agency. Well, I'm not saying losing, but he's an unrestricted free agent. So it's up to him where he wants to go. So as a replacement for Javon Hargrave, I gave them Walter Nolan, a bigger, similarly explosive athlete to Javon Hargrave, but in a bigger package and a much more violent package. And with him on that defensive line, I think he would. I think Walter Nolan. Oh, honestly, I think Walter Nolan would do well on any defensive line, but you throw him in that 49ers situation, and I think he'll shine.
Okay. And Will, what was your best fit for the 49ers?
I think I'm going to go defensive line again. I mean, my board, of course, very heavy on defensive line because I'm doing this as an exercise from, top of the draft to down. I selected Kenneth Grant for them. I know that, they probably they're losing Javon Hargrave, and Kenneth Grant's not exactly the same player as Javon Hargrave. He's a little bit less of a one gap penetrator and more of a guy that can two gap and still get you some pass pressure. But I feel like in a way that balances out a little bit better. Javon Hargrave's usage was starting to come down a little bit. So I think Grant maybe upgrades what they're trying to go to. And they did have some trouble, against the run late in the season. That was one of those things that their defense couldn't get off the field. So Kenneth Grant definitely helps in that regard.
Okay. And Will, who is your best fit for the Cowboys?
Yeah, another polarizing player, but I'm going to go with Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. I think, when you have a guy like Micah Parsons who is a little bit like I described earlier, that's kind of multi-tool. So he's pass rushing and giving you some different looks from different places. I think it's nice to have a complement to that is going to get a lot of single looks because of Micah Parsons. And maybe, as a number 2, I like Scorton a little bit better than I like him if he were trying to carry a team as a pass rusher. So I like him as a sort of a Robin. And at this point on the board, the pass rushers are starting to get, scooped up because it's, premium position. So anyway, I like Scorton's fit there. And of course he's from Texas. They'll love that as the Dallas Cowboy fans.
Okay. And EJ, who do you have as your best fit for Dallas?
Same school, just different player. I gave them Shamar Stewart.
Oh, yeah.
So I was looking at it. I wanted to cheat a little bit because they're losing Osa Odighizuwa, the defensive tackle in free agency. He's an unrestricted free agency. I assume they're gonna bring back DeMarcus Lawrence. He's one of their guys, but he's getting up there in age, so they're gonna need another replacement. Michael Parsons is going to need another running mate. So I went with Shamar Stewart. He's big enough to kick inside and play some snaps at defensive tackle, and he can handle the run defense, and he can get after the passer on the edge. So I thought that would be and plus, he's a Texas guy, so it'd be a good fit.
Okay, and the next team is Miami. So EJ, who is your best scheme fit for Miami?
I gave them some help in the defensive backfield. They're losing both their starting safeties. Both their starting safeties are headed to free agency, and they could use some help at the cornerback position too. So I wanted to give mainly what I wanted to do with Miami. I wanted to give them some versatility in the defensive backfield. So I went with Jahdae Barron. He's a guy you can put him in a slot. I think the way his strengths and weaknesses are, I view him as a similar player to Cooper DeJean from last year. He's a guy, he can play safety, he can play in the nickel, he can play outside if you need him to, some snaps. I look at Jahdae Barron the same way, and I look at this Dolphins defensive roster. Both their starting safeties are unrestricted free agents, and they got young players on the opposite side of Jalen Ramsey. So he's pretty much, you can look at Jahdae Barron as pretty much a Swiss Army knife for that defensive backfield. Wherever they have the hole at, they can plug him in, and they're going to get a really good player.
Yeah. And Will, what did you think is the best fit for Miami?
Almost picked the same player. Their defensive secondary is definitely where the issue is, but with all the changes, I looked at Storm Duck as as a starting outside receiver and thought, I like Storm Duck and all, but you have a chance to get Shannon Ravel Jr. from East Carolina. What I did hear some medical news about him, which is that he is expected to be 100%, and so there's no question about his medicals going forward as far as we know. And Ravel, I think, he could very quickly become the number one corner on this team. I like Jalen Ramsey, his reputation. and so on and so forth. And his disposition, I think he's a good leader for a team. But Siobhan Ravel is a guy that I think is going to be a star in the league. It's hard to sometimes project from teams that don't have the highest levels of competition, but Ravel is a very dominant man corner. I get the sense that you look at what their secondary is like. When you have multiple issues and multiple layers of replacing players, it's just nice to have a guy that you can depend on. It's just like, go over there and do your job. And it's not just about coverage. He's a guy that makes tackles. He's going to offer run support. He's going to be a really dependable player for somebody immediately as a number 2 on any team in the NFL, I think, and then eventually being a top 5 corner in the league.
Okay. And then, Will, who is your best fit for the Colts?
I love this idea of Nick Emanwari, this safety from South Carolina. I'm still trying to figure out how South Carolina lost to LSU and didn't make the playoff. So if anybody can write in and explain to me, their defense was so loaded in 2024 with a lot of guys that are now leaving. But man, they had some players. Emanwari, I feel like, is a guy that is just like this physically outstanding. He's like having a great athlete that can sort of erase mistakes. And something like that in the secondary, I feel really helps you, especially playing in a dome. Those kinds of players seem to have a lot of impact. I don't mind so much the players that they have elsewhere in their secondary. I really like Juju Brents. I feel like Brents, I hope, is going to continue to progress and eventually become as good a player as I think he can be. So I thought safety was more added. Jalen Jones is a player that's in a spot there that can be upgraded. I think that was my reason for the choice.
And EJ, who is your favorite defensive player for the Colts?
I was thinking along those same lines as getting like a replacement for Jalen Jones. I was thinking that same way. Ultimately, I went with linebacker. They're losing. EJ Speed is unrestricted free agent. So I was looking for a replacement for him. So I gave them Carson Schlesinger. He's a guy, gives you tremendous range in coverage and excellent instincts. Little bit undersized at the moment, but that Colts team, they're still a growing team. They're still building everything up. So he's got time to develop along with the other young players that they got there. So I think he's a good fit there.
Okay, and the next team up is the Falcons. So EJ, who is your favorite defensive fit for the Falcons?
So the Falcons is where I gave them Abdul Carter. They need more pass rush. They need to get stronger on that defensive line. So I gave them Abdul Carter. I mean, he's pretty much plug and play pass rusher. Expect 7 to 10 sacks from him year one. If they were wanted to get creative with him, put him as a stack linebacker, line up in the A gap, let him blitz from that A gap, let him do some simulated pressures, make it so that they got to guess where he is on every snap. That's how you maximize his talents. If the Falcons were to do that, that would be tremendous for them. But yeah, pretty much Abdul Carter, he's pretty much a good scheme fit for anybody, but I got him going to the Falcons.
Okay. And Will, what did you have for Atlanta?
We almost did it. Carson Schlesinger, linebacker for Atlanta. Here's what I'd say about Atlanta. It's like I look around at their team and I they have players, but I'm not sure they have like the right players somehow. Like they just feel like they're missing some stuff. And I know that there's bodies all over the place in that defense, but I think it's sort of like when you're building a defense, you sometimes have to keep at it, even though you have players that are okay in order to try to get better. And I feel like Schlesinger offers something a little bit different from what they have. You take a guy like Hayden Ellis, and I think and Troy Anderson is sort of like a sideline to sideline guy, but you had Schlesinger as sort of an underrated, maybe as a weak side backer for them. I feel like that could make a difference. That was my choice for them. Although edge was a perfectly fine choice. And then am I on to the card?
Yeah, you're on to Arizona, yes.
Great. So as far as Arizona is concerned, I think, who doesn't, there's you either have edge and you don't have edge, or you don't have enough edge. Everybody's in the edge market. I think Mike Green from Marshall. Oh, the off the field. It's like I don't know. This. It seems like there's a little smoke there. He has denied everything, and some people that are sort of closer to the situation have said that there's nothing there that's really going to come back to bite the team that drafts him. But I also like the idea of putting him in Arizona and not Vegas. So for his own sake and for the sake of the Cardinals, I'm going to put Mike Green there in Arizona.
And EJ, who did you have for the Cardinals?
I gave them Kenneth Grant, defensive tackle. Jonathan Gannon, from his time here in Philly, the best version of his defense is when he had rookie Jordan Davis and Linval Joseph as his nose tackles. They were able to stop the run and allowed him to play his fancy coverages on the back end, and he had they couldn't run, so his edge rushers were able to pin their ears back and get to the quarterback. That's the best version. That was in 2022. That's the best version of Jonathan Gannon. That's what he wants his defense to be. But in order for all that to happen, he needs a solid nose tackle. So that's why I gave them Kenneth Grant. He's a big guy. You can put him right in the middle. He's going to plug the run, and he's going to give you some pass rush ability as well. I think having a solid nose tackle is essential for Gannon's defense that he likes to run. So I threw Kenneth Grant as a scheme fit.
Okay, and the next team is the Cincinnati Bengals, EJ. Who is your best fit for the Bengals?
So Cincinnati, I gave them TJ Sanders. They run a four-man front. They like to let their defensive tackles get after it. Honestly, with that Cincinnati defense, anybody they could use help everywhere. They struggled a lot last season, but I gave them TJ Sanders, the defensive tackle. Give them some interior pass rush to go along with Chris Jenkins. I think that will be a dynamic duo up the middle, and take some attention off of Trey Hendrickson and let him work a little bit more with a little bit more freedom. So I think TJ Sanders would be a good fit.
Yeah. And I wanted to pause for a second. So EJ, wasn't it last week when you were doing linebackers and you were commenting on the South Carolina defense, and it was the linebacker opposite Demetrius Knight, which popped?
Yep. Yeah. Bam Morris Scott. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Him. I'm trying to watch Demetrius Knight, and I'm like, who is this guy at number 22? He kept flashing on tape. So I'm like, oh, let me look him up. I looked him up, find out he's on the list, invited to the combine. And I tell you, I'm like, he's a better pure athlete. He's a better pure athlete than Demetrius Knight. And he comes in the same 6'2", 241 package. He's a guy to watch. I got him as one of my sleepers. I want to see how he does at the combine. I want to see how he tests athletically. I think he's going to do pretty well. But he's a guy that he was new to football. He didn't start playing football till like his senior year in high school. So he's a guy. He played special teams up until this season, where they actually let him play linebacker, and he flashes. So I think he's a guy. I think he's going to get drafted. I think he'll get drafted on day 3. I think he'll stand out on special teams, but I think eventually he'll be able to carve himself into a starting role.
Wanted to make sure that, like, it's that whole South Carolina, and you had picked TJ Sanders for the Bengals. I wanted to make sure I connected all that. Will, what do you think is the best fit for the Bengals?
By the way, I love this concept. I think this is something that should really be taken to heart by people who are looking at players in the draft and watching film. This concept of watching so you're looking for some prospect and you see somebody else on the tape that pops and you're like, who is that guy? I'm thinking about guys that I recognize that way for sure. Alex Highsmith, Max Crosby, Tyler Warren. These are all players that, I was looking at other players 2 or 3 years before they came out in the draft. And I was like, write that guy's name down. So I actually have, at first I was trying to remember them all, but now I've decided that, it's better to be organized. So I have a spreadsheet just devoted to future players. So anyway, that's a great way to discover a player. It's a corollary to if you're going to go watch for tape on a player that had a good pro day or something, but you don't know anything about them, is you put on their tape, and if they don't pop in the first couple of minutes, you're like moving along. Anyway, related to that theory. All right, so
that's how you do summer scouting.
Yeah, that's it. Something to do. To kill time in the summer, right? Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We're at Bengals for me, right?
Correct.
Walter Nolan is the player I picked for Cincinnati. Please, Bengals, for the love of God, get Trey Hendrickson some help on the defensive line. I like, Chris Jenkins. Okay, Sam Hubbard does what he does. The thing about Nolan is, even if you're only going to use him in the nickel as an interior pass rusher, he's going to wreak havoc. But I think actually, this is somebody you play, maybe replacing BJ Hill, and let Hill be the sort of depth for you. That makes you suddenly a lot more dangerous on defense and a lot less susceptible to getting run over by certain teams in your division. A thing I alluded to earlier.
Okay, and then the next team up is Seattle. So, Will, who is your best fit for Seattle?
All right, so this is the closest I've come to picking a player for a team where they don't necessarily need him desperately at this position, but he feels like such a player that fits somebody. He reminds me of someone else. So Shamar Stewart was the player I selected. I think Shamar Stewart is a bit like Cliff Averill from the standpoint of, I think he's a guy that can be an interior pass rusher that's a little bit too quick and slippery for interior protection, which when you play, nickel defenses like 65% of the time or more, is a really key component to your team. So yeah, they got Leonard Williams. I like Nwosu as a sort of the stand-up guy or the guy that plays more like a 3-4 edge would. But I think Walter Nolan's a great football player. I just feel like he seems so Seattle to me that I couldn't resist picking him here.
Okay, and EJ, who is your best fit for Seattle?
I gave them Jahad Campbell. Gave them some stacked linebacker, but Jahad Campbell, he's a guy you can put him into your pass rush as well. So I think he helps in both aspects. I think he fills a need because their starting linebacker is heading into unrestricted free agency, so he can fill that role right there. And like if they wanted to bring him along slowly, they can put him on the edge and let him get after the passer a little bit. So I think Jahad Campbell would be a good fit in Seattle.
This is me interacting with the chat.
Yeah.
So
the nerve of you ignoring our incredible, insightful commentary.
So the next team in the draft order is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, EJ, who is your best defensive scheme fit for the Buccaneers?
I gave the Buccaneers James Pierce Jr. They're losing Joe Tryon. I'm not going to try to say his other part of his name. He's an unrestricted free agent. They're going to need somebody to replace that type of pass rush. He brings that type of, he's a stand-up edge rusher. He brings that type of juice off the edge that they would need. I think they're pretty solid in the middle of their defense with their defensive tackle. They got Kalijah Kancey and the other guy, his name escapes me, but I think they need there you go. Yeah, Vita Vea. But I think they need more help off the edge. So I gave them James Pierce, and I think he can put his hand in the dirt and get after the passer, or he can rush from a 2-point stance. I think they'll find a way to use him in advantageous situations. So I think he's a good scheme fit in Tampa Bay.
Okay, and Will, who did you have as your best fit for the Buccaneers?
I think Tampa Bay used to enjoy using a lot of the defensive backs. Like they would rotate defensive backs. They had different guys in different packages. So like you might see 6 or 7 guys in Tampa Bay who would make plays, and you'd be like, I didn't even know that guy was in the game. I feel like that's diminished a little bit lately for them, and so I'm going to replenish their secondary. And they have a couple of guys who are sort of position flexible a little bit. I think Tyke Smith and Zion McCollum both have the ability to play either the slot and outside, or maybe even in a certain defensive fronts where they're playing a more off ball or more like a safety position, like in a cover 3 or a way where you can disguise your coverage and drop them. So I'm going to add Trey Amos, the cornerback from Ole Miss. I think he's more of a straight outside corner, but he's he's a guy I feel like if you added to this mix, it wouldn't surprise me to learn that, in a year or two, he's your starting corner on the outside over one of those guys, and then they're going to move some of those other guys around.
Okay, and then the next team up is Denver. So, Will, who did you have as your best defensive fit for the Broncos?
Yeah, this, it starts to get a little bit tougher down here. I mean, Denver, like in terms of matching it up to like the top players on my board, right? I think they need defensive line help, but they need, they have guys that are in the spot where you would normally see a run defender. They have a guy that's like a little bit more of a penetrator. I just picked a solid defensive lineman for them because I feel like you get a versatile defensive lineman who I think has a lot of athletic ability and is already a really good football player. As the draft class goes, he is a year over age. He's 23, but he's Alfred Collins, the defensive lineman from Texas. And think about Collins, if you throw him in a defense that's already pretty good, I feel like he could really shine. In other words, other guys are getting some attention, and he's someone that can come in and he could play, sort of the 5 tech for you. He's probably best suited as a 3 or playing further inside. But once again, versatile defensive lineman.
Okay, and EJ, who did you have as your best defensive fit?
Yeah, I was thinking on the same lines. I gave them a defensive tackle. I gave them Jamari Caldwell. Their nose tackle, Jones, he's an unrestricted free agent. Jamari Caldwell he's not tall, but he's a wide body, and he's a very good athlete for his size. He can play the nose tackle. He can play some 3 technique. But he's just another big body in the middle of that defense that's going to plug up the run. And like if you get him head on you put him at a 0 tech against a center, he's going to whoop that center pretty much 70% of the time. And I think it allows more once he starts doing that, I think it'll give more attention to the inside, and that allows the edge rusher like Nick Benito to come around the edge and use his speed and agility like he does. So I think Jamari Caldwell I got is a good scheme fit.
Okay. And then who is your best fit for the Steelers? And there's a lot of pressure here because Will has the longest running Steelers podcast.
Uh-oh. All right. So
you're gonna, you know what? Right. They have so many needs. You're gonna do fine.
All right. So I went cornerback. Get somebody to go play next to
Joey Porter.
Play next to Joey Porter Jr. I went that way because Dante Jackson's an unrestricted free agent. Minka Fitzpatrick at safety is one of my favorite players. I loved him from the day from Alabama days. I thought he's an excellent player. But I gave them Trey Amos. He's a tall, longer corner. Mm-hmm. They got 2. With Amos and Joey Porter Jr., they got 2 guys that can play man coverage. So if you wanted to load the box and have single high coverages and let Minka Fitzpatrick roam, you can do that now. Only issue with Trey Amos, not sure about the long speed, but his strength and his physicality, he can restrict wide receivers that's trying to run by him. He can use his hands. He actually has good ball skills as well. He's a guy that I would trust in man coverage. So I think him into that Pittsburgh Steelers defense that's already pretty good, and you give them 2 solid man cover corners, I think that's an excellent fit.
Yeah. First of all, Caldwell, Jeremy Caldwell, mm-hmm. What a great pick. Maybe the best pure nose tackle type in the draft.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Especially
pound for pound. He's not the tallest guy, but he's just like that little, concrete block that you can't lift. So exactly. I'll take that. And as far as the Steelers with the Amos, of course, yeah. I wish you were the Steelers defensive coordinator though, because they intend on playing Minka Fitzpatrick in Altoona, which is the town between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
And so in the last 2 years, he's been playing so far off the ball that we really miss him. It's like every once in a while you see him and you're like, oh yeah, he still plays for the Steelers. So
yeah, that takes away from what makes him special.
I'm with you 100. I think most Steeler fans are with you. So we don't, we don't get it. Anyway, to me for the Steelers.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't really have any idea about what their needs are. I think they need a slot corner desperately. I mean, that can with speed, somebody that can do some of the things that they lost when Mike Hilton left years ago for Cincinnati, and they haven't really replaced him. They need a second outside corner, as you suggested a moment ago. They really need some help on the defensive line. I think they're shy of really a couple of defensive linemen. So I selected for them one of those on my board, the best one that was left, and that's Tyleik Williams from Ohio State. I picked already a lot of defensive linemen in my draft tonight, but I would say that of the guys left, he would be almost the most likely for the Steelers to pick anyway. He's one of the probably top 2 or 3 guys that they will target. More of a pure, one tech, zero tech. He's not a guy that's going to give you a lot of flexibility along the defensive line. He's not necessarily going to, give you a lot of pass rush, but they need solid players in the middle of the line. They gave up 300 yards rushing in their last game to the Ravens. That's very unacceptable. That's going to ruin whatever plans you have on defense. So this would allow for Keanu Benton to move to the outside, or for them to be able to add a different, 5 tech who can move inside on passing downs. So I like Tyleik Williams for them a lot.
Okay. And Will, who would be your best fit for the Chargers?
I think Chargers, I trust the Bosa that's in, is that Joey that's in Los Angeles?
I believe so, yes.
It's Nick in San Francisco and Joey. I trust Joey Bosa to stay healthy about as much as I trust myself to not overeat at Thanksgiving. So I feel like a pass rusher for them and one of that sort of a mold. And so I picked Princely Umamalian from Ole Miss. I feel like that's a guy that's being slept on a little bit in the class. Loved what he did, throughout the season. He's in the SEC. There's so many pass rushers in the SEC. It's easy to get a little bit lost. But then at the Senior Bowl, I felt like he left a couple of postcard moments, which is what you're trying to do when you're there. You're just like, we only have a couple of days of practice and a few reps here and there. You got to make one of them count so that I get stuck in someone's head and they say during the process, you know what? Remember that guy, what he did? And he had one of those moments. So I like that for the Chargers. They need that, a dependable edge rusher with juice.
Okay, and EJ, who is your best fit for the Chargers?
I went with cornerback position. I gave them Maxwell Harrison out of Kentucky. They're losing unrestricted free agents. Starting 2 corners, Christian Fulton and Asante Samuel Jr. They're unrestricted free agents. So I was looking for a replacement as an outside corner. Maxwell Harrison, he's thin. He's on the thinner side. He has excellent ball skills, though. Very good ball skills. It's not a lot of his interceptions are right place, right time. But you look at his pass breakups, he breaks on the ball very fast, and he has some physicality to him. If you wanted to play man coverage, he's best playing like some off man where he's keeping all the action in front of him. But I think he would be a scheme fit in the defensive backfield with the Chargers.
Okay, and then the next team up is Green Bay. So EJ, who's your best fit for Green Bay?
For Green Bay, now see, they're one of these teams that have height, weight, speed requirements for their draft picks. They're very particular as far as like wide receivers and corners and all that. So with their defensive backs, I know they like athletes. So I gave them the biggest athlete of them all. I gave them Siobhan Revel. So, and this guy, when I first watched him, he played special teams too. He blocked like 4 or 5 punts. Like this guy was 6'3", close to 200 pounds. He's in a 3-point stance coming off the edge in kick formations. And he's not blocked punts. I'm sorry. He blocked field goals.
Field goal case, yeah.
Yeah, he blocked. And it's like the burst coming off the edge and the speed and the length. I'm like, this guy he's a freak athlete. He's like throw level of competition out of the window because you watch him. We all can see when somebody's moving faster than everybody else, and that's what you're seeing with Siobhan Revel. And it's just the fact that usually the case with guys coming from smaller schools, they're not up on they don't have the nuance yet. They don't have the technique. And that's the issue with Siobhan Revel. Also with you got to make sure the medicals clear up, but mainly like His issue is he's raw. He's a high-end athlete, but he's raw. But that's what the Packers like. They like high-end athletes, and I trust their coaching staff to coach him up, and I think he's a good fit there.
Cool. And Will, who is your best fit for the Packers?
I'm going with the audible. I had a player selected before this started, but I think I'm looking at the roster, and I'm realizing that I forgot to account for the fact that Jair Alexander might be leaving them. So outside corner versus I picked a slot for them, thinking that they could move Nixon or one of their other players into the slot. But I'm going to go with a player that we haven't talked a lot about. I don't know how much on other shows, Jim, you'll be able to tell me, but I feel like this is a player that might actually fit Green Bay's ideas, like you said, their standards for what they look for in defensive backs. Zy Alexander, the corner from LSU, who started his career at Southeast Louisiana. Zy Alexander was like the top, Pro Football Focus, statistics for coverage in the college football. But more importantly, he can really play. A guy had an injury, bounced back 100% from it. And I think if you're a Green Bay corner, the fact that you've recovered from an injury and came back to be 100% is a plus, because they always seem to have like cornerbacks and safeties injured in Green Bay. They're always like shuffling around to try to cover for it, I feel like. So as a non-Packers fan, that's what it feels like from the outside. Maybe it's, Packers fans don't get at me. Maybe it's not totally true. But anyway, I like Zy Alexander. I feel like he's people don't know him as well because he started off as a lower recruit. But he's a very sticky man coverage player with good ball skills. I feel like they could use a guy like that. He replaces a lot of what Jair Alexander does, and maybe would be a fit for them.
So, Will, how high do you have Alexander on your board?
I have him on the all defensive board. I have him at 30. So he's probably in the right around where Maxwell Harrison is for teams, depending on what you're looking for.
Yeah, so that's about a top 50. That's close to a top 50 player.
Yeah,
right?
I have two corners ahead of him that I haven't selected for this exercise, but that are just different frame and different kind of players, and probably a little bit too small for what a team like the Packers looks for. So yeah, I can actually tell you, I think he's around 65 on the regular.
So as I've listened to podcasts and different things with the draft professor and Alexander, you're the highest, but not by much.
Yeah.
So generally I'm seeing him between 75 and 115. So he's either like a late round 3 corner or a sometime mid 4th round corner.
Sure.
And I think somebody pointed out that there's an injury history there that was preventing them from moving him higher.
Yeah, like I said, he was injured last year, and even started slowly. They worked him. They finally put him in the lineup, I think in the first or second week this year. But he I think is completely recovered from that. I guess we'll find out, and we'll see how he runs. I think for a guy like this, that most people are sort of, they have him high based on tape, but they're just trying to figure out where he fits in, and he's not like he doesn't have 34-inch arms as a corner. He's not the tallest, the biggest, but he's a corner, I think, that's plug and play coming from the SEC. And, if he runs high 4.4s, maybe he's a late 3rd, early 4th. If he runs closer to 4.4, he's probably going to go earlier than that. And also, I don't think there are that many outside corners in this draft. There's a lot of slots. There's a ton of slots.
I would agree with that too.
Yeah, and a ton of slimmer players for at outside corner who are like a little bit less sturdy and less active in the run game and so on and so forth. So I think maybe him being an outside corner can really, and with that SEC tape, I think it's going to bode well for him.
EJ, where do you have Alexander on your board?
Yeah, real quick on Zy Alexander. I think my first or second podcast here, I scouted him, and like he was a pleasant surprise for me. He's a guy like he's a professional cornerback. His technique is excellent. He's got good instincts. He's got good hands. like you could see him. Like the comp I gave him was Kamari Lassiter from last season. Your only worry is like you got to see how he's going to test. You got to see how he's going to run his 40. You got to see how fluid he looks in drills. I think he can be a starting cornerback in the NFL. But yeah, he's a pleasant surprise. For where
so
we
next team is Minnesota.
Okay, so I went cornerback with Minnesota as well. Looking at their roster, they only got 2 cornerbacks under contract, and that's Mekhi Blackman and Dwight McGlothern. So you got to start somewhere. So I gave them Azari Thomas from Florida State. He's one of my favorites. I like him at cornerback as well. He's he was about 6'2", close to 200 pounds. He's a man cover corner. He's very fluid. For a tall player, he's very fluid in changing his directions at corner. He has no problem playing press man. He can play off man. He's a guy that he has the traits to be your number 1 corner later on down the line. So, and with the Vikings not having a whole bunch at that position right now, that he's a good place to start.
Okay, and Will, who is your best fit for Minnesota?
I went safety for them, although I picked a player who could either play nickel or safety. They have needs at both. I'm not a huge fan of Minnesota's secondary. I feel like that's where their sort of weak link is. They have a very, very good team. If they make a little upgrade at quarterback and some little upgrades in their secondary, I feel like they're really going to be a contender. So I picked Malachi Starks from Georgia. Starks is another guy that, 23 was amazing and had him, in the top 10 of the draft. And then 24 was like, okay, we're seeing a couple of the issues that he might have. But, I also feel like there's a little bit of a position thing there. I think you got to find a spot for him where he can use his skills better. And maybe, a deep safety is not quite as good for him as being a nickel where he can be closer to the line of scrimmage. So that's why I picked Malachi Starks.
Okay. Let's pause for a quick minute and do a quick commercial. So Will, welcome back to the channel. I know that you and I have worked with each other for a while, but there's probably some people in our audience that haven't met you yet. Specifically our regular Brandon. He's here every night. So Brandon, it's good to see you, but Will, feel free to introduce yourself.
Well, I started podcasting for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2008. So that show is still going on. The Steeler Fury Pittsburgh Steelers show is the longest running Steelers podcast in the world. And, we're still going in this era of frustrations for the Steelers. So that is something. But the last, during that time in the off seasons or in the, non-Steelers seasons, we have been really draft focused. We had one of the first 32 human being GM drafts. That's probably been going on for more than 20 years now. And that's still ongoing. A couple of years ago, I had this idea during the pandemic for draft a team where everybody would draft an entire team of offense and defense in one draft. And we started with 21 GMs. Imagine 21 GMs picking an entire team of quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, defensive line, and so on and so forth. Really fun exercise. Great way to kill a couple of weeks before the draft. So those are the things that, maybe people might know me from, other than being a curmudgeon on Twitter, which of course I do at Accidental Zen.
Yeah. And Brandon, you will see Will hosting one of the 32 GM mocks. I believe that's in 3 weeks. It might be 2 weeks. I'd have to go look at the calendar, but you will get the
14th, I think, right?
Yeah, I believe it's March 14th. And what's that? 3 weeks. Okay, that's like 2.5 weeks. There we go. It's like 17 days. But Brandon, definitely good to see you here. EJ, you want to give yourself a little bit of time to tell everybody who you are?
Yeah, I'm EJ Holt. I am a offensive and defensive scout. I do film breakdowns on Twitter. I am also one of the writers for the Rogue Analytics Draft Guide. It comes out every year. Keep an eye out for that coming in a couple of months. I just got my list of prospects to do, so I will be going through prospects, doing film breakdowns pretty much on Twitter. And I'll be here every Wednesday, 7:00, talking draft.
Yep. So,
but by the way, Jim, I neglected to give you a plug because draftprofessor.com, for the first time this year, you can try your own hand at Draft a Team. So kudos to Jim for taking that idea and turning it into something that you can do on your computer at home with bots that are excellent at picking other teams against you. Or, it's an amazing resource for getting down into the depth of positions.
Thank you. So actually, we are doing our first Draft a Team event at 9:00 tonight. So that's actually in 50 minutes. So
right on.
We built this great thing in the simulator, and I had a lot of help from Will as I was getting it designed and things. But we haven't actually used it this draft cycle. And I just have to learn to let podcasters just have fun. Like, as opposed to constantly giving people content. No, like Draft a Team, that's going to be a fun exercise. So I think we have about 6 or 7 of us that are going to be doing it at 9:00. But just to remind everybody, the channel has daily draft content. So please and thank you, subscribe on YouTube and hit the like on YouTube. That really makes a huge difference. We are noticing that we are trending in front of more eyes. It's because everybody's liking the podcast and subscribing. We want to keep that going. So I truly appreciate everybody that's in the chat. I see Jake Robertson, who podcasts on Mondays, as well as Home Squad Sports. I believe you will be podcasting with us shortly. And then Brandon, like I said, you're just a fixture here. You're here every night. So thank you. That being said, we have Houston, and Brandon is a Texans fan. So pressure. EJ, who is your best Texans defensive scheme fit?
So I hope they'll be happy with Darius Alexander, defensive tackle from Toledo. Just looking at the Texans roster, Fatukasi, he's an unrestricted free agent. They already got Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson on the edge. Tim Settle, Tommy Togiai, who I kind of liked out of Ohio State when he came out. But you got a lot of unrestricted free agents in the middle of that defensive line. So I figured you get a guy like Darius Alexander. He's an older prospect, but he's ready to play right now. And that's what the Texans need. They need guys to play right now. So I figure he would fit as playing in the 3 technique. Getting upfield, adding pressure to that defensive line, or taking pressure off of Will Anderson or Danielle Hunter and setting them free to get pressure.
Yeah. And Will, what did you have for Houston?
Very much on the same wavelength. So I'm relieved because I'm pitching up against the guy who's the Houston Texans guy. I picked Shamar Turner from Texas A&M, another defensive tackle who can wreak some havoc in the middle of the field. 6'2", 300-pounder that I think is very polarizing. I think there's people that are really into this guy's potential, and other people that think he's more of a hit or miss prospect. But I kind of feel like this is the draft is a time to take swings. It bugs me that teams, especially early in the draft, are so concerned with trying to take guys with very high floors. I'd rather take a guy that you think if we get him in our building and we get him to do what we want him to do a little bit more, that he can be a top player as opposed to just a solid starter, right? So he's this kind of pick, Shamar Stewart.
Okay, and then Will, who is your best defensive fit for the Los Angeles Rams?
I don't know. I like Jordan Phillips from Maryland for them. I'm not sure. Jordan Phillips is a guy that I'm not sure where he goes in the real draft in terms of the sequence of things. And that's partially a function of how many defensive tackles that there are. But if you like defensive tackles who are really great with their hands and using leverage, I think he's a guy like that. And, under the description that EJ just gave about a team like Houston needing somebody that can play right now, maybe that was a better choice out of these 2 players, because I do feel like he's technically very sound, and you're not going to have to drill fundamentals into him to get him on the field. So from that standpoint, I think he has a very high floor. I'm a little bit concerned about his anchor, but I feel like if you're going to more or less set him loose, as a one gap defender that he can be very effective, and that suits that what they're liking to do there in the Rams, in terms of their defensive front.
And EJ, who was your best defensive fit for the Rams?
So I was right there with you. I wanted to give them a defensive tackle as well. I actually did, and then I had to flip it around because I wanted to put them somewhere else. But I was on that same wavelength as well. But I wound up giving them a middle linebacker, Demetrius Knight. The reason why I did that is, it's clear the Rams need help stopping the run. You watched them in the playoffs, and you watched. Just the 2 games against the Eagles. Saquon Barkley ran for 200 yards each game, and that's not just the running back being special. That is your 5 offensive linemen dominating the 4 defensive linemen on the other end on the other side of the ball. So I gave them. They have excellent pass rushing defensive players, defensive ends, and defensive tackles, but they're not big. So I think a nose tackle there makes perfect sense. I gave them a linebacker because Joe Roseboom, Joe Roseboom, the linebacker. He's an unrestricted free agent. Christian Roseboom. Yeah, Christian Roseboom. He's an unrestricted free agent. The Rams are a team that don't value linebacker highly, but they should. Demetrius Knight is that type of linebacker that he enjoys the physical parts of the game. So if your defensive line is a little bit undersized, Demetrius Knight is a guy that can meet the offensive lineman when he wants to climb to the second level and disengage and still go make the tackle. So he gives them a little bit more size, a little bit more toughness in their front 7, and hopefully that helps with them stopping the run. So that's why I figured he'd be a good fit.
Okay. And who is your best fit for the Baltimore Ravens?
Baltimore Ravens, I got Tyleik Williams, defensive tackle. For the Ravens, they were a hard team to look for a fit for. I like a lot of the talent that they have on that team, but I figure interior pass rush. Looking at their depth chart, I would say defensive tackle would be. I would say it looks good because they do an eye front as well. So basically, you're going to have 3 defensive tackles on the field. You already have. I figured that Tyleik Williams would be a good nose tackle to go along with what they have in Travis Jones already. Or if you wanted to upgrade over Broderick Washington as your 4-eye-5 technique, I think Tyleik Williams can play that role as well. But I figured I'd give them more help on the interior of the defensive line. I thought that would be a good fit.
And Will, what did you have for Baltimore?
I think they have some issues. Darius Washington is a free agent. I suspect that they're going to re-sign him. But even so, I feel like you got Brandon Stevens, who's probably gone. Maybe they'll move TJ Tampin up at the outside corner, but secondary help, I think, is the place where they need more. Their defensive line front, this interior wise, especially, they're very satisfied to just have a bunch of big bodies in there. I think that do a really good job for them funneling stuff out to the edges. So probably, edge for them is someplace that they could use help. And in this case, I chose Xavier Watts, the safety, to help them. And I'm thinking of this in terms of, Kyle Hamilton last year they made a big deal of it. In the middle of the year, they moved him back to free safety so that, to sort of calm things down. And he was able to still make plays and move around and so on and so forth. Giving them Watts in addition to Kyle Hamilton is like, that would be 2 guys that would, take each other to, all pros. That's a really great fit for, they can cover for each other. Troy Polamalu needed to have his Ryan Clark, the guy to stay home and cover for him whenever he went off and did something. And I think Kyle Hamilton is a similar kind of player.
Okay. And Will, who is your best defensive fit for the Detroit Lions?
They seem, dissatisfied with some edge rushers that I felt were really good players. I thought James Houston was a guy that maybe should have been starting for them, and they he got a bunch of sacks, like he got 8 sacks in the first 7 games or something, and then they slowly petered him out of the offense and he's gone now. So I feel like they have an unending search to try to find a complementary pass rusher to Hutchinson. I selected for them Donovan Ezureku from Boston College. Once again, in my edge rusher way of looking at things with edge rushers, I like to have different kinds of edge rushers to complement each other on a team. And Hutchinson, I think, is a little bit more hand in the dirt guy to really he's less look like a stand-up player, and he's not moving around the defense very much. As a Rocco, I think you could stand him up, you can move him and to rush from different spots on the line. I feel like that's a nice compliment to Hutchinson.
And EJ, who is your best defensive fit for the Lions?
Yeah, I went edge as well. I gave them Nick Scorton. I think he's a guy that he embodies what the Lions like to do on defense: toughness, grit. I think he plays motor. I think he plays like Aiden Hutchinson does. I think he would be an excellent running mate for Aiden Hutchinson when he gets healthy. They're a team that's like when healthy, they're pretty loaded. And you add Scorton to that mix, and you really have a excellent defensive front.
Awesome. And then the Commanders are next. So EJ, who is your best fit for the Commanders?
I gave them edge rusher. The Commanders are one of the teams that you hear about. They have a lot of interest in Myles Garrett. And rightfully so. They're looking for edge rushers. I gave them LSU edge rusher Braden Swinson. He's been one of my favorites since the summertime. 6'4", 250. He's a guy that he has the play strength necessary to hold up at the point of attack against the run, and he has a pass rush plan, and he can get after the passer a little bit. I want to see how he tests at the combine. I think if he tests well, that would do wonders for his draft stock, because I think the film is there for him to be a solid pick. But I gave them Braden Swinson to Washington. I think he walks right into there and he gets reps as an edge rusher because they need it. I think their edge rushers. They're a team in flux on the defensive line. They just gave Jonathan Allen a chance to seek a trade. They're going through their whole contract issues and everything. But I think Braden Swinson would be an excellent fit in Washington.
Okay. And Will, how about you for Washington?
Yeah, edge rusher was definitely in play. In my scenario, so many edge rushers have gone already on my board that it felt unjustified to go much deeper on edge rusher to get to them, a player that I wasn't sure was necessarily a good fit for what they're looking for. I think I kind of feel like they sort of need a speed guy, and I don't think there's a lot of that left on my board because of how I've used it tonight. So I in looking at their cornerback situation, I loved Mike Sandershill for 2 years before he came out, and I think he played extremely well. But I do believe his home eventually is at nickel or as a piece that can move around, so that maybe he plays outside in base and he comes into nickel and in the passing downs. And so I added a corner for them. I added Azariah Thomas from Florida State for them. I don't really hate any of the other guys that I have, but I think Marshawn Lattimore might be sort of towards the end. So not the worst time to add another corner for the Commanders as they now, attack a season instead of coming from nowhere. Now they're going to be a team that everybody goes after.
Okay. So for the Bills, Will, what was your best?
Pressure, right? Pressure.
Yes.
I picked TJ Sanders. There were two. Defensive tackle, I think, is a big need for the Bills. And there were two guys that I was trying to decide between, and I picked one here and one later in my 32. But I would say about Sanders for the Bills, battle tested. He was effective even early as a player in the SEC, which I think is always a very good sign. Very disruptive player. Sort of plays bigger than he is. He's under 300 pounds, but is very stout. Kind of like his game a lot. He's a player that when I started the draft process, I thought would be a top, 25 or 30 pick in the draft. And there's just so many defensive linemen that he's gotten pushed down much further than that now for me. But even so, really quality player for the Bills.
Okay, and EJ, who's your best fit for the Bills?
I went cornerback for the Bills. Rasul Douglas is an unrestricted free agent. That leaves them with Christian Benford and Kyer Elam, who hasn't turned out to be what they thought he would be. So I gave them Noel Williams, cornerback from Cal. He's a guy that I like, 6'1", 190. He can play press man. He can play off man. He has decent speed. And he also gives you immediate special teams value as a kick returner. But as far he has ball skills, and one of the things I think he has part of the best ball skills in his class. He can play in some zone as well. He's physical. He'll run up and tackle, but I think he can be he offers more of that playmaker ability in that defensive backfield that I think Buffalo needs. So I went with a cornerback.
So I like that one. Just out of curiosity, EJ, where do you have Noel Williams on your board?
As far as
top 100.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And Will, how about you?
Same.
Okay.
I was just trying to look to see exactly where it was.
So I'll filibuster for Will, so that everybody knows Cal was the most scouted school by Buffalo this year.
Oh, really?
And they don't usually scout on the West Coast.
Hmm.
So they were either watching every wide receiver he played, because other than Williams, it's Teddy Buchanan, and maybe Cal had a running back, but I don't remember. Was it Jay Knott?
Yeah, Jay Knott. I don't think he.
But I think he went back to school, right?
Yeah.
So,
and Cal they have another safety. I think he's in the combine, but more than likely they were looking at Noah. If they were scouting Cal, they were looking at Noah Williams.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So one of the guys I work with, he tracks the Bills scouts. Right, during the college football season. So he knows which teams the Bills scouts saw in person. And even sometimes it's announced that Brandon Beane, their GM, was there. So Brandon Beane saw Cal play at least once this year. So
that's a great tip. I mean, and I think he's a good player, and it seems like a good fit for them. I can see it.
Yep.
Great selection.
Okay, and then Will or EJ, who do you have as the Chiefs' best defensive fit?
I went cornerback again. I gave them Benjamin Morrison. If you look at the Super Bowl, Justin Watson was getting picked on. They need an upgrade there. Trent McDuffie is an excellent player, but you need your entire defensive backfield to be on that level. So I gave them Benjamin Morrison. He is, main thing with him is you have to see what's going on with the hip injury. And hips for cornerbacks, you absolutely need that. But as a player on the field, when he is on the field, he's tough, he's sticky, he's athletic, he's physical, he's everything you want in the corner. When you watch him play, you can see some of the similarities in the play style between Trent McDuffie and Benjamin Morrison. So I think he would be an excellent fit to what the Chiefs do.
Yep. And then, Will, who is your best fit for the Chiefs?
Well, I look again at it in terms of like who is still available on my board. I selected for them a defensive lineman. I'm not sold on. I know they have two guys that are great, but I felt like those guys got gassed, and then what came in behind them was not so effective for them. So I picked Darius Alexander for them. I feel like once again you could have picked a defensive tackle for every team from 1 to 32 off the top list of defensive tackles in this draft and not duplicated anybody and upgraded all these teams, right? There are 32 defensive tackles who can play. Darius Alexander, a little bit of a late bloomer, which is the knock on him and probably what makes him a second rounder in real life instead of a first rounder. But man, the way that he's peaked his career this year, the tail end of this season and his final game certainly left an impression on people. And, I have a friend who works in where he works in the building of one of the NFL franchises in the same division as the Steelers, and often has good Steelers intel because I think they keep pretty good tabs on their other division opponents. And he's convinced that the Steelers are going to pick Darius Alexander. He couldn't tell me like if they think he's a first rounder or second rounder. I would say based on his age, more likely a second rounder, but I expect him to go at least that high in the draft, and he's a perfect fit for what they like to do. at any rate, for the Chiefs, certainly helps them solidify the middle of their defense, which is an issue.
Okay. And Will, who is, for last but not least, who is your best defensive fit for the Eagles?
Man, you can pick anybody, right? Their defense is so good. They are not just good in their starting 11. Their next layer would be a pretty good defense in the league, I think. But I feel like pass rusher, they've been getting some success with guys who are a little bit unorthodox, that are more like chess pieces that you move around. So I gave them one of those in Kyle Kennard, the edge rusher from South Carolina. But I also feel like Kennard offers a little bit of toughness, something that their other edge rushers, as far as what they're normally throwing on the field and rotating around, he fills a little gap maybe. And I feel like that's somebody that can totally help them. He's a bit more like young Brandon Graham maybe, and that's the thing that seems to stick in my mind when thinking about a fit here. But I feel like, for Philadelphia, you just pick the best defensive player available. That's what I try to do.
Yeah. And EJ, the Eagles are your team.
Yes.
So what do you think of Kennard, and then who was your pick for the Eagles?
Yeah, I'm all in on Kennard. I think he's an excellent fit. The speed off the edge that he has, I think he fits perfectly, and he's like, his body type is in the same mold as what they've been bringing in. He'll be an excellent fit. And who I got is just the Eagles have no chance of drafting this guy unless something crazy happens. But I put a best fit as Mykel Williams. First of all, he's from Georgia, and the Eagles love Georgia players. Second, I think he'll because the Eagles are going to lose Josh Sweat to free agency. They're going to lose Milton Williams. That's your 4-eye/3 tech in Milton Williams. That's your rusher off the edge in Josh Sweat. Josh Sweat, he is one of the biggest defensive ends on the roster. He's about 6'5", 265. Mykel Williams is around that same size, and he offers that same type of play strength and that same type of pass rush upside. Now, if we haven't seen Mykel Williams, the pass rusher, a lot. We have seen Mykel Williams, the interior rusher, the 4-eye, which he can perfectly play in the Eagles scheme. If he doesn't make it as a outside pass rusher, they can kick him inside, and I think he'll do just fine there. But I think he has also the pass rush upside to where he can be a difference maker. And the fact that Eagles they're probably already going to have their two starting edge rushers in Jalix Hunt, who was a pleasant surprise, and Nolan Smith, who made excellent strides this year. So they have their starters, so they don't have to rush Mykel Williams, so to speak. And they also have Bryce Huff, but but they don't have to rush him, and they can let him develop, they can let him grow. But I think he would be a player like Mykel Williams or some player in that mold. They would be an excellent fit here in Philly.
Cool.
Hey, EJ, just a quick Philly question. Are they expected to keep Zach Bond, or do you think you're going to lose him?
Yeah, the GM, Howie Roseman, he's at the Combine. He did an interview earlier this week, and he said Zach Bond is the priority. He's the first priority. They're going to try and keep him. They're going to try to work something out. Usually what they're doing at the Combine, Howie's going to be talking to guys, trying to see what the market is, because historically the Eagles don't value the linebacker position. But when you have a difference maker, he'll pay for that. So he says Zach Bond is the top priority for the offseason. So I believe they'll figure something out.
Well, my dream of Nolan Smith as an off-ball linebacker in the NFL is still alive, but hanging on life support. Yeah. I think he's obviously been a really good pass rusher and blitzer for them, but I feel like, man, that guy in the middle of the defense reading, reacting, he was so good as an off-ball outside linebacker at Georgia that I just keep wanting to see that in the NFL. So the dream is still alive.
Yeah, they tried it actually a couple of times in training camp, but his instincts, his read and react isn't fast enough. So that's why and plus they needed him on the edge. They didn't have anybody else on the edge. But they've tried some little funky schemes where they put him as a stack linebacker and they let him blitz from the A gap. So there are some packages where he'll be a stack linebacker.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So this was a fun exercise. Like while you guys are talking, I'm like looking at the list. I think one of you is San Francisco correct. I'd be willing to put money between Walter Nolan and Kenneth Grant.
Oh, yeah.
I would be willing to put money that one of you is right. I'm also willing to put money that one or both of you are right for Buffalo. Right? Buffalo is 2 second-round picks. So I'm more than willing to put money on TJ Sanders plus Noah Williams. It's theoretically reasonable that you could both be right for Pittsburgh between Tyleik Williams and Trey Amos in rounds 1 and 2.
Yeah, I like that. Tyleik. I mean, they probably like Tyleik Williams higher on their board than I would have him. So I think that makes it even more likely that that's a good pick for them. I don't dislike him. I just I think the modern NFL, you want an interior defensive tackle who's really going to wreak havoc and not just be a guy who is solid against the run. Those days are sort of like a little passe, even though teams are getting back to running, and you have to be good at stopping the run. Sometimes you just need them to like create havoc in the face of like a Patrick Mahomes, right? That is the thing against a team that's just trying to run it against you and play conservative football. Sure, run stoppers are great to have, and you need them. But when you have a top flight quarterback, man, you need those guys that can create interior pressure.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep this and like bookmark it, and we'll come back after the draft.
Embarrassing.
I'll tweet out the podcast again. And I think from let's say an academic exercise, I actually thought this was actually quite helpful.
Yeah, I think it was fun. It's like a better version of a mock draft. It's like it got to be more specific.
Yes.
Yeah, being more specific is the thing we're always trying to get with, having fans of a team or somebody that knows the team well pick for them in these exercises and so on. That definitely tries to give us a feel ahead of time, right? But even so, it's really hard to get it right.
Yeah.
And if we do this early enough in the draft cycle and people see it, they might be able to say this player over this player for this scheme reason or something to that effect. Like the Noah Williams, you guys may have not known that Buffalo scouted Cal that much.
Nope.
That's a
good tip.
That's an insider tip. So.
I mean, I also feel like, let's face it, what happens this week at the combine is going to shuffle some of these people.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And maybe knock a couple up or down that would effectively change some of these things. So looking forward to that like everyone else.
And Will, I also think the messaging that you had about this is not a good boundary corner class, especially on day 1 and 2.
I think that's fair to say, especially when there are so many classes that are great. I mean, I feel like same is true of wide receiver. There's a lot of slots. The way the college game has evolved, slot, you can have slot players who are just fast, basically, who can run from the slot across the field. And if you've got strong enough outside receivers, then they're running against a linebacker or your third or fourth worst cover guy. And if they have long enough time, pass protection to get across the field, they're going to produce, whether they'd be good doing something else is going to be a projection. But those outside guys, man, are becoming very rare. Maybe more of them will come out next year and the year after that, I think, are bigger classes for outside receivers. But yeah, so boundary corners and outside receivers are both unusually shy this year compared to, it seems like the last 5 years we've had millions of them,
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So we can continue that discourse. We have been going for more than 90 minutes. So for the 42 podcasters at the Draft Professor, for EJ, for Will, for myself, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you on a podcast again in about 20 minutes. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Guys.
Thanks, EJ.